Thank you so much, Anna, for the music. Welcome, everyone. Sorry that we're running a few minutes late. Just a quick reminder to choose your preferred language channel through the translation button at the bottom of the screen. So you have a choice to follow the webinar in English or in Spanish. Please do that so you can follow along in your preferred languages. So welcome to a special webinar co-hosted by the Internews Health Journalism Network and the Internews Earth Journalism Network. This is a first collaboration for us on a subject that is of interest to all our journalists who are a member of our specialized networks. Today's topic is accessing accurate and reliable gender disaggregated data, a journalist's dilemma. Following a presentation from our three speakers, we'll be opening the session up to audience questions. For those of you who are watching this live, if there's something that you'd like to ask our speakers, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom at the bottom of your screen, not the chat box. This will allow us to monitor the Q&A feature, and so please just put the questions there. Additionally, this webinar, as you probably have noticed, is being recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch or catch any parts that you have missed on our website in the next few days, and attendees will receive an email to watch it. So my name is Bea Spadaccini, and I manage the Internews Health Journalism Network. A few words about this network. It was officially launched at the end of 2020 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. This network is now a community of more than 1,300 media practitioners from 85 countries who have an interest in covering health. Our network has three main goals. One is to build community, to support the creation of a global and dynamic community of health media professionals. Two, to build capacity, to offer our members media resources and specialized training to cover health. So check out our website for the latest opportunities and stories. My colleague Catherine is going to put in the chat the link to the website. And the third objective is really to improve the quality of health reporting worldwide. Health and science reporting is a specialized branch of journalism, as you know, and it requires ongoing learning. So we want to nurture the creation of health journalism networks in countries and regions where there's none, and expand where they already exist. Through our members and their activities, we seek to train the next generation of health journalists and media professionals. Now, I would like to invite my colleague Anna Bernstein, our technical producer behind today's webinar, to say a few words about our sister network. Please, Anna.
Thanks, Bea. And hi, everyone. My name's Hannah, and I work with Internews' Earth Journalism Network. Like Bea said, the sister network to the Health Journalism Network. And we have much of the same goals in terms of improving the quantity and quality of environmental journalism worldwide. It's really important to us also to acknowledge the intersections between health and environment reporting, the really, really important ways that these issues overlap. And that's why we're really excited to be co-hosting this webinar with the Health Journalism Network so that we can talk about how data journalism can explore both of these issues and also the shared challenges and opportunities to accessing data on both of these topics. So really looking forward to hearing from all of our panelists today and to hear the questions you might have. So please do ask questions in the Q&A function. And yeah, pass it back to you, Bea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. You guys are the big sister network, I must say, because you're much bigger than us. And please also put the registration link for both networks in the chat. So today's topic is about access to reliable and accurate data that tells us how different events, circumstances, or policies impact men and women. So data journalism is really about adopting a scientific approach in journalism. It is part of the digital revolution in how news is being covered nowadays. As journalists, we need to know where to find data, how to analyze it, and how to visualize a story through data. Data allows us to find untold stories and to create compelling narratives that are more interactive and multidimensional. Data also enables journalists to hold decision makers accountable, which is key, and to understand how funding is allocated and spent and how policies impact people. So gender equality is fundamental to achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that have been agreed upon by the international community. But achieving gender equality really means understanding where the baseline is for women and girls when it comes to health, education, environment, employment, ownership of land and property, percentage of women in positions of leadership, etc. Data that is disaggregated by gender gives us a better picture of where women and girls are in society compared to men. In the health sector, we often look and compare data on fertility rates, mortality rates, life expectancy, disease prevalence, ratio of medical personnel to the population, percentage of people who have access to safe drinking water, etc. Data informs our stories and allows us to offer context and perspectives. Data disaggregated by gender is critical for designing robust health programs that respond to the needs of local populations and for creating policies that promote healthy behavior, save lives, and mitigate disease. Think of the COVID-19 pandemic and how essential data has been for tracking the virus, for tracking infection rates, and for measuring vaccine uptake in a country or within a country and in different countries. Thanks to data, we know how the pandemic has impacted women differently than men. For instance, we know that women have experienced higher rates of gender-based violence during lockdowns. Lastly, how does gender intersect with the environment? Another way to think about this is how do environmental issues impact women and girls compared to men? And what are the differences and how do we measure them? For example, pregnant and breastfeeding women face greater threats from the pollution of air and water. Furthermore, since women and girls in many countries are responsible for fetching water, cooking, and other household chores, they're much more at risk from waterborne diseases, which are expected to increase with a changing climate. Another example is the widespread inequalities that exist when it comes to women's right to own and use and control land. So while women in many countries have the legal right to own land, customary, traditional, religious practices still prevent women from having full access and control of land. So journalists who are interested in covering gender issues and or environmental sustainability must understand what type of data links these issues and what is missing from the pictures, so you can go after untold stories. So let's start today's discussion by digging into the gender data portal of the World Bank, okay? So I'm going to introduce the first speaker of today, who is Sarah Bunker. She's a data specialist at the World Bank. She bridges work across the World Bank gender and data groups, as well as managing efforts to improve the accessibility and usability of sex disaggregated data and gender statistics at the country level through the gender data portal. Sarah also brings numbers to life, like a lot of journalists do, making gender gaps more visible through blogs and interactive data visualization. Prior to joining the World Bank, Sarah worked on a variety of development projects and surveys addressing water and sanitation, and hygiene, education, other health topics, and girls' empowerment in Africa, the Caribbean, and Europe. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bea. I'm just about to share my screen. Hopefully you guys can all see this now.
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk about and share how you can use this tool and how it could help journalists in their work. So very briefly, I wanted to touch on what Bea was saying in terms of, there's this systemic lack of data disaggregated by sex and data in general on women's issues. So this is one of the fundamental reasons why the World Bank has invested in partnerships with other international organizations to use its comparative advantage to work with governments not only to collect more gender data, but to ensure that the data that's being collected are reliable, measuring the right type of information, especially for complex topics like women's work or ownership of assets. And once they are collected, it's important that they are disseminated publicly and widely and to be utilized for policy reform. So really, to address this last point, we revamped the Gender Data Portal, which is the World Bank's comprehensive database with over 900 indicators on gender statistics that are mostly used by gender data specialists and economists. However, we made changes to make the data more accessible and made gender gaps more digestible through compelling stories and data visualizations, as Bale was saying. And this is really to expand its use by intermediaries like research community, media, and civil society organizations, as well as policymakers, to inform and motivate policy discussions to close gender gaps. If you've used a previous version of the portal, it was very hard to understand quickly what data were available in the database. And as journalists, you're often running tight on deadlines to write articles and grab quick stats. So now you'll see a more user-friendly navigation, which highlights key features and has a description when you hover over them. There's an enhanced search function where you can now use common phrases like financial inclusion, social norms, acronyms like GBV for gender-based violence, or LFP for labor force participation, or even women's work or jobs, rather than using an exact technical name of an indicator. We now have 14 user-friendly topics, which have a description and a few indicator examples of what type of data can be found within that topic profile. Once you select a topic profile, you'll see key indicators visualized, be able to access definitions and sources for the indicators, as well as related content and a full list of indicators within the topic down below at the end here. Just to give you an example of what the topic profiles look like, the data for all indicators within a topic profile can be downloaded, even if they're not visualized on the page. The topic profile is a great start to really familiarize yourself with the gender-specific issues within that topic and the data available, showing the high-level insights. It can be downloaded also as a PDF, so you can easily share with colleagues on WhatsApp, or you can share the web page through social media or email. Here's just an excerpt from the health profile, where you can see the patterns and progress for maternal mortality and adolescent fertility. While low-income countries have progressed the most over the past 2 decades, they still also have the highest rates. These insights could be cited, for example, as background context in an article, or encourage further exploration to pinpoint which low-income countries really drove this progress. If your focus is mainly on one country, we also have country profiles with narrative that explains how a country is progressing on the key indicators compared to their regional or income group averages, or compared to other countries in the region. They have similar download and sharing to the topic profiles, but provide much more context and give an overview of the gender landscape across all topics. So if you're writing an article to call attention to the areas for the government that must be addressed, the summary is an easy first step, as you don't have to spend time looking up all of the different relevant indicators separately and analyze them. It's all neatly done for you. These are excerpts from the country profile PDF that I was just talking about. On the left for Colombia, we see, for example, the gap between girls and boys completing lower secondary school is much larger, as I circled here, than for the region and the income group that they are in. This may motivate further investigation on why the pattern is so different for Colombia. On the right, we see that in Morocco, women spend 7 times as many hours in a day on unpaid domestic and care work, which Bea had already explained kind of contributes to women's lack of economic opportunities that they partake in because they're spending more time at home, especially during the COVID period. One of the biggest changes is this new visualization tool that allows you to explore the patterns and stories of every indicator in the database. So this is useful if you need to gather the most recent data point on a particular indicator, or need to create a visualization for your article without using any sort of software. You can map the data or gender gaps, you can chart the trends and customize the comparator countries. You can change the time period, and we've also included a data table that updates every single time you change the filters. You can copy and paste from this data table down below, or you can directly download the data from there. Once again, you can also see the details of the data, the meaning, the source, the definition. The bar chart also provides the functionality to select all countries within an income group level or within a region to compare. And lastly, users can also correlate the selected indicator with any of the other indicators in the database, as you can see here. We're correlating employment for females in services with expected years of school. But I'd like to turn to something a little bit more relevant to today's discussion is an example from environment. So given that Laura will later be talking about gender and environment, here's an example of an image downloaded directly from the scatter plot view that I just showed you and plopped into this PowerPoint. It only took me about 2 seconds. So it shows that in households where there's no water on the premises, that is associated with higher rates of female mortality attributed to unsafe water and sanitation. These are a few more examples as well, downloaded directly from the tool. On the left is youth unemployment in various countries, and on the right is the gender gap in mortality rate attributed to ambient air pollution. So the purple here is showing higher rates for men than women, which could be due to the fact that men travel outside of the house for work more and some women stay at home. What's nice about all of these visualizations from the portal is that we kept the journalists in mind. Some journalists have access to certain softwares and tools that allow them to change the fonts or change the colors so that it is matching the branding of their media outlet if they need to. So that you also don't have to parse through all of the databases. We have summarized the data availability per indicator and country so that you don't have to go find this by yourself. This will help in the search for the data that you are looking for. And then just moving on to more of a narrative component, this kind of storytelling, are the data stories that we have. These serve as an entry point for different targeted audiences in understanding data and contributing factors or consequences of gender gaps. So this story here is actually on adolescent fertility and walks the user scrolling through these visualizations and highlights the global and regional trends and the progress in certain countries, but also explains how teenage pregnancy is related to and connected to child marriage, education, and eventual employment outcomes. In addition to the data stories, we have blocks which are translated into Spanish, French, Arabic, and sometimes Chinese and Portuguese. Our colleagues have pasted an example, I believe, of one of the migration blogs that we have into the chat for you. If they have not yet, then I can paste it as well after the PowerPoint. But Joandre, our next speaker, primarily focuses on migrant women in Latin America and their access to health systems. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have many resources to help point you to each country's national statistical office, where they very often have gender pages and data where you can find subnational data, data at the provincial or regional level to complement the national level data that's in the gender data portal. And we also have free data literacy courses in English and in Arabic, as well as free courses on how to communicate gender statistics as well. So I hope that several of these functions of the new gender data portal could be useful and looking forward to any of the questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's really exciting. I personally love visits, and so just seeing all that, there's so much information there. So like you said, now we're going to hear from, can you hear me better? I'm speaking, especially asking the interpreter. I'm hoping that's why I put the headset on. Anyways, now we're going to hear from a colleague, a journalist and a member of the Health Journalism Network, Joandre Suarez, who's a Venezuelan journalist, and he's based in Colombia. And He is the director of the Venezuelan Al Minuto, VAM, and a fact checker for Colombia Check on Conectado Caminos por los Derechos, a project that verifies information about Venezuelan migrants and Colombian returnees and host communities. Joandri is associated with his work to Cápsula Migrante, a project that focuses on Venezuela migrants in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. In 2021, he received a grant to cover the right to housing for Venezuelans in Colombia and a grant to report on pregnant migrant women access to maternity services in Colombia. He will share his experience tracking reliable and comprehensive data from the ground as he covers a population in limbo and in transit. Joandri, over to you. Joandri, puedes hablar, si quieres puedes hablar y compartir tu presentación. No te entiendo, tiene que poner el unmute. I think you're, oh, okay. Try, no, we still can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
I think, Beatrice, if you go to the interpretation and go under English or Spanish, I can hear him.
Oh, awesome, perfect. I can hear you in Spanish, but I'm in the English channel. Anna, can you troubleshoot perhaps? Technical producer.
So, Joandri, you should be in the Spanish channel because you're speaking in Spanish, and the interpreter Paulette will start speaking once Joandri starts presenting in English. So everyone in the English channel, please go to the bottom of your screen, make sure you click English. If you want to hear in English, we will hear the interpreter interpreting Joandri's presentation into English. You must be in the English channel to do that.
Awesome.
Okay. Joandri. Okay, Joandri, we still can't hear you.
I am listening in Spanish, so I understand, but it sounds like the interpreter cannot hear you. Yeah, I'm in the Spanish channel. Can anyone else share if in English you can hear Joandri?
The interpreter can't hear him in any channel. Joandri, can you try to go to the original audio channel instead of English or Spanish? I just want to see if that will work. Sorry, everyone. We are just figuring this out as we go. Thanks for your patience. I hear you now. Paulette, can you hear Joandri now? I'm not sure why.
Well, is he speaking? Or his
Joandri, can you start speaking?
I think he's frozen.
I can hear you in the English channel.
Huh. I can't, I'm in the Spanish channel and I can't hear him. Oh, well, we're in the era of Zoom. This is what happens.
Joandri, can you speak again, please?
I can't hear him.
Okay, I can hear him.
Yes,
Okay, great.
Yes,
Joandre, you can begin. Thank you everyone for your patience.
thank you. Thank you so much, Joandre. Really, really thoughtful presentation that brings us close to the issues that you have covered and the challenges you have faced. There's really a lot of food for thought here, particularly on data that is not tracked, the data gap. So let's now move on, because I know we're running a bit out of time, to our third speaker, Laura Cooper Hall, who's a gender program officer with the Human Rights and Conservation team at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN. In this role, Laura works on the intersection of gender and conservation, with a focus on how they're impacted by climate change. Prior to joining IUCN, Lara worked on the link between reproductive health and the environment at the Population Reference Bureau. She has also worked at Women's Environment and Development Organization as a Gender and Climate Finance Research Fellow. But just a fun fact, prior to her master's degree, Laura worked with Population Services International in Yangon, Myanmar, for 2 years. Over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. Can everyone hear me, including the interpreter?
I can hear you in English.
Great. I'm gonna keep going, but monitor whether any chats come in with issues with sound. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Cooper Hall. And as Bea mentioned, I'm a gender program officer in the Human Rights and Conservation team at IUCN. So today, I hope I convey how important gender environment data is for effective environmental programming, and how this data can be a tool for journalists to contribute to the effort of encouraging evidence-based programming and policymaking decisions. I'll present some information on what is gender environment data and what IUCN has been doing to address the challenge, whether that be helping to define what is gender environment data, actually generating and providing that kind of data, or working directly with governments and institutions to build understanding and capacity, or taking a step back to think about combating the challenge we face of limited availability and access to this data. Next slide, please. So, as mentioned, gender environment data and information is key for effective environmental programming and policymaking, and critical for measuring progress and informing action on gender responsive, sustainable development. Journalists can also use data as a tool to create a clear narrative for convincing messaging that results in evidence-based and informed action. Why are you a journalist? I have to assume it is because you are interested in changing minds, changing action. You need evidence to create a convincing story. So, like IUCN, you need data. Of course, data can mean many different things. It can be quantitative, so statistics using surveys, or it can be qualitative, so using case studies or stories. All these types of data that show the link between gender and social dynamics and the environment can contribute to developing a convincing narrative for action. Unfortunately, the issue of data accessibility is an often mentioned and widely recognized issue for journalists, IUCN and other actors as well, for encouraging policy change on the intersection of gender and the environment. But there are a lot of actors trying to address this problem, like IUCN. So what is IUCN doing to address this challenge? Next slide, please. Well, first, we're working to help make the definition of gender environment data more and more specific and clear. In 2016, the United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP, published a report on global perspectives on gender and environment, in which they identified a lack of gender data in relation to the environment at the national and international level, limiting the ability of countries to monitor and evaluate progress in the inclusion of gender in environmental policies and programs. This led to a partnership with us, with IUCN, and in 2018, we carried out a project on gender and environment statistics. The project developed a list of indicators at the national level, which were feasible and easily integrated into existing national statistical systems, order to build a baseline foundation of gender environment information. We also identified specific challenges, good practices, and opportunities for improvement in relation to data collection and the creation of gender and environment statistics and indicators. This was possible because the report focused on 3 case studies, one in Kenya, national level, the other in Mexico, and the other one in the Lao People's Democratic Republic. Finally, this publication aimed at also recommending 5 indicators for inclusion in the minimum set of gender indicators at the interagency and expert group on gender statistics, so a high-level UN body. Thanks to the efforts of IUCN and UNEP, among others, one of those suggested 5 was actually included in that list. Next slide, please. The comprehensive list of indicators proposed by IUCN includes 19 indicators that can be considered when starting to measure the gender and environment nexus at the national level. Many of these indicators are aligned with the SDGs to ensure their feasibility and facilitate their collection, as many of the countries in the world, as we know, are already including these types of indicators in their statistic generation. The 19 indicators are grouped into 4 priority areas as listed on this slide. The first fall under land rights, natural resources, and biodiversity. The second focused on access to food, energy, water, and sanitation. The third, climate change, sustainable consumption and production, and health and well-being. And the fourth was women in environmental decision-making. I won't read out the indicator examples that are on this slide, but you can see here what some examples of what these indicators could look like are. And of course, I think the link is in the chat, and I'll also share links after I've spoken to this document and others so you can see the detail. But please feel free to check out these documents online, and also feel free to check out our website. Of course, Sarah's also worked on this intersection and can share resources, has shared resources and examples of starting points for specific indicators. Next slide. Now, in addition to helping think about how we can define gender environment data and information, we also do our own data generation. One of our most recent efforts to collect and analyze national level data falls under our Environment and Gender Information, or EGI, analyses. IUCN under EGI identifies and fills data gaps to inform more robust, gender responsive environmental policymaking and programming. Using our EGI methodology, we work to reveal progress and challenges in meeting commitments to women's empowerment and gender equality in the environmental spheres, guiding action toward a more just world. This act of revealing relationships through information is important as we do our best to communicate the analysis and findings in ways that are reader-friendly, easily accessible, and legible for journalists and also to the public. I'm sure you're very familiar with this type of effort. Our most recent analysis focused on understanding progress on gender inclusion in nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, which are policy commitments that individual countries present to the UN body responsible for coordinating international work on addressing climate change, and on the representation of women in national level ministries which focus on environmental issues. As you can see on the slide, NDCs are increasingly mentioning gender, and women's representation is also increasing, though slowly. Next slide, please. IUCN also works directly with governments and institutions to build capacity on data. The case studies in the report I mentioned earlier with UNEP, case studies from Kenya, Laos, and Mexico of the SDGs paper not only served to better understand national needs, but the methodology facilitated cooperation between the ministries of gender and environment, their statistical departments, and the national statistical bodies, in some cases for the first time. In early 2020, we did another case study in Jordan with the aim of continuing to support countries in strengthening their statistical systems, but above all, to help forge cross-sector collaborations and synergies. With this experience, we found, among other things, that it is important to invest in training statisticians and civil servants in both gender and environment to build understanding on these linkages, and so that they, as experts, can identify entry points within their own systems. We also found that it is important to advocate for the standardization of monitoring systems to the extent possible for more efficiency and to respond to multiple commitments at once. This requires cross-communication between national focal points of different conventions and the SDGs at the national level, often located in different ministries. For example, we've also worked with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD, to make the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Monitoring Framework more gender responsive. And some of these indicators might be relevant for creating baselines and monitoring climate change impacts. I'll share the link to that information note we did with CBD in the chat soon. Looking to better understand party needs in terms of gender indicators within the CBD, IUCN also conducted a survey of governments of parties that are members. Initial findings showed that gender data is relevant and useful for promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. Also showed that informing national and international policy making is also important in terms of the use of gender and environment data. And data is important for reporting on progress in the achievement of the objectives of the CBD. These are all perspectives gathered directly from parties in the survey. Respondents also indicated capacity building needs, which included support on indicator development and methodology, on the importance of the connections between gender and biodiversity, and in understanding the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, gender considerations within the framework, and the monitoring framework. For more information, again, I'll post the link to the information note in the chat. It is essential to continue strengthening spaces for dialogue and mutual learning where different ministries or countries can learn from the challenges and good practices of others and help each other in the development of their capacities and their policies and programs at the national level, as well as in the international spheres. So that brings me to my next point. Next slide, please. Another example of IUCN work is this partnership that we've started with other organizations to establish the Gender Environment Data Alliance, or JADA. JADA works across these needs that I've mentioned that came through that survey of capacity strengthening, cross-collaboration, and establishment of shared spaces, and more. A goal of JADA is to create a space for dialogue and mutual learning, and to help each other in the development of capacities, policies, and programs at the national level, as well as in international. JADA was conceived to support the collection of wide-ranging disaggregated data and use of intersectional gender analyses for gender-just climate and environmental action. This alliance was formed as a collective commitment, really spearheaded by IUCN and also the Women's Environment and Development Organization, or WEDO, under the Generation Equality Forum, an initiative started by UN Women and the governments of France and Mexico as a platform to collect, curate, and communicate data, knowledge, and information needed to ensure gender-just climate action. You can see the different principles that we've established as the foundation for JADA's work on the slide. We're only in design stages at the moment with JADA, but we look forward to eventually working directly with journalists and the media to communicate clearly on how can we use on what is gender environment data, why it is important, and how can we use it to make sure policy and programming is truly inclusive. Next slide. So we of course have other initiatives, work on other topics and issues focused on addressing data gaps. For example, we've been thinking about not just new data, but also new methods for using data to understand trends. For example, we have a report on the triple nexus of gender, climate change, and state fragility, where we used a new method of overlaying indicators to understand these trends. But this is all I'll cover for now. I hope you all feel you've learned a little bit more about what is gender environment data and the power that it holds for impacting policy change. At IUCN, we're always thinking about what kind of data we need, how do we get it, and how do we make it available to others. And we love considering how we can work with new partners to come up with creative solutions to shared challenges like gender inequality and the climate crisis. Please reach out if you have any questions or would like to learn more. We have some links on the slide. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your presentation. Really appreciate that. We're out of time, we're over time, but we started a little bit late, so I'm hoping folks can stay on a few more minutes, 5 minutes perhaps. There are a couple of questions here in the chat that I'd like, and especially one really important question that I'd like to pose to our panelists, especially the World Bank and IUCN. How do you capture data that reflects non-binary gender identities? This is clearly an important question. So either Sarah or Laura, and certainly if Joandre has any thoughts, please go ahead and give us some thoughts.
Sure, I could chime in first. At the moment, there isn't a clear, I would say, international framework for gender statistics to collect multiple gender identities. There are some very forthcoming reports as well as frameworks coming out of, I believe, Canada, perhaps New Zealand as well, and I believe the UK. And those are kind of the examples that we've seen so far. We do within the World Bank have a unit that works on sexual orientation and gender identity, and that is going to make its way into more of the frameworks and strategies that are upcoming. But in terms of collecting that data, which is usually collected through national statistics offices and curated through international organizations and then lands into the gender data portal, since we as a gender group in the World Bank aren't collecting our own data, we rely on those national statistical offices. And so I believe we have some sorts of operations that are working with the national statistical offices to maybe pilot some of these within some of their surveys, but it really is a negotiation process and an agreement with the government as well in order to incorporate more of this. But we do agree that we definitely need to be collecting it. And I'm hoping that we will see, just with the same thing with gender and environment nexus, there are a lot of data that we are missing, and hopefully in the next 5, even 10 years that we see an increase in all of these.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I mean, this, like you say, a lot also rests on the the national statistical offices of various countries. So not all countries collect that type of data, but I'm glad to hear that you guys are really thinking about it and trying to incorporate as much as you can in new frameworks. So I have a couple more questions that might be directed to Joandre. One is for Joandre, as a journalist and a fact checker, how do you verify the reliability and accuracy of the data that you come across? Like, how do you make sure that the data is accurate? Thank you. Thank you. These are very important points, Joandre. And let me double check. There's a couple more questions. Maybe I'll shift back to Sarah and Laura. Perhaps, I don't know if, maybe I don't want to put you in the spot, Laura, but what do you see are the biggest mistakes that journalists make when they use data in their stories? Any thoughts about that? Yeah, I mean, mistakes, or maybe, I don't know if they're entirely mistakes, but there is a question about that. What do you see? How is the media using data and some of the limitations you've seen?
I can respond to that. Maybe apologies, but reframing a little so that it's because what I think about when I think about ways to maybe make stories stronger or really push for further using journalism for action and for change, I think there's a missed opportunity to a degree when we are thinking about who can you focus on or who can you highlight in your story to really make data come to life, or think more or show more clearly what data can mean on a personal level. And so thinking along those lines, I think it's really, I really encourage journalists to look at, considering your story, the location of that story. Hopefully it's a story coming from where you're from, where you live, your community, and finding the women's organizations, just thinking a lot about who we tend to work with here at IUCN. We really try to find women's organizations at the community level, at the local level, these networks that exist everywhere, that have direct links to the needs, the issues, the challenges that people are facing on the community level. So these groups definitely exist where you are and where you want to be focusing your story. So including them in the either highlighting as a case study or as a personal illumination of higher level data you might be referencing in your writing is a really helpful way to push for change and emphasize what policy means and programming means to the individual and to the personal. So including those types of groups, thinking about them when you're writing, is something I would say is important and convincing.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I think Joandre did exactly that, because I think he worked with many civil society organizations, and in fact, he also said, let's also share the data back that we find with different organizations. I think it's a very important point. I have a question here in the Q&A by Manka Bernice from the Anglophone side of Cameroon. And it's really more a question for Joandre as a reporter, and not so much necessarily linked to data, but he kind of alluded to the issue of not re-victimizing, doing no harm to women, for example, in this case, in his story case, that have already been exposed to abuse and violence. And so Manka asked, how is it someone reporting in a region that faces a conflict or a crisis, like in Cameroon, how can you report without causing tension or doing harm? Any thoughts, Joandre, because you have also worked on issues and you're covering Venezuelan women in Colombia and dealing with a population that is not always protected in terms of human rights. How do you, as a journalist, take that responsibility to do no harm? Any thoughts? Thank you so much, Andre. The three words that stand out from what you said is humanity, empathy, and trust, which also, I think, when we look at data, remembering that data, there's real people stories behind the data. So it kind of connects to that. Having empathy for the data and what's behind the data, what the data tells us. So I'm very conscious that we're 17 minutes over time. I see that my colleague Paula Orlando put a really useful publication about ethical coverage of gender-based violence from UNFPA here in the chat, especially for Mandika, the person from Cameroon. Might be useful, that publication to have. So I know there's a few other questions here, but I'm conscious of the time. If perhaps what we can do, let me ask one final question and then we'll close it, is, 1 second, I can't totally see it. Wasting time. Okay, off the top of your head, do you see potential data stories here on gender and the environment? This is for Laura. What are some suggestions that you have for journalists on undercovered stories on gender and the environment, off the top of your head? And then we'll close it. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks for letting me be the closing question giver. Yeah, so getting to what I had said earlier, I think one suggestion is, again, is reaching out to those women's networks, the people who understand what's happening on the ground the most. So that's one suggestion. And in terms of ideas of topics or themes, something that we've been working on and has really been growing in our work and seems to be on a trajectory of more and more interest on behalf of people at all levels of decision making, is the link between gender, the environment, and gender-based violence. So we had this big publication, I think it was early 2020, it was published, on how gender-based violence is linked to climate change and the environment. And from there, we've started to see a lot of stories come out, or finally, maybe they were already out, but now being brought up into policy spaces that make those links. And a lot is also growing on women and environment, human rights defenders. So the work happening, that's really powerful work, really important work, very sensitive work, and work that's really had a lot of significant repercussions in the negative on individuals doing this making these important efforts. So women and environmental human rights defenders is also a growing topic and a suggestion to look into what's happening there. And that is also work that's happening everywhere. It's happening in every country, people doing making that type of effort. So bringing in those stories and elevating them through your journalism, I think, will be really important, and there'll be growing attention as we progress and as the climate crisis gets more and more intense and has greater and greater impact, unless there are stories like the ones you'll be writing to try to push policymakers to do the right thing and move the time back, move progress backwards in terms of how climate is progressing. I'll stop there. Happy to answer questions from any of you. If they're the gender and IUCN at IUCN.org email was up on my slide, and always happy to discuss ideas.
Maybe you can pop the email here just for folks who are live. I have one, I'm going to take moderator privileges and ask one follow-up question to both of you. If journalists use your databases or your indicators who are here, are you interested in seeing those stories? Can they share them with you?
Yeah, of course. We have a very active Gender at IUCN Twitter page, so we're always happy to elevate stories through our social media, and that in a more kind of indirect connection, but more personally would love to see your journalism. We're always looking for more examples of how these links manifest, and that is helped by journalism and the stories that you all write. So definitely.
Sarah, anything from your?
Yes, absolutely. Especially with the revamped portal now having so many different functionalities for journalists and civil society organization members. We would love to see how people are using it, love to hear what else they would like to see potentially on the portal, or if there's anything that they would change. And if there are any topics or indicators missing, then we would love to kind of review, criteria for being able to add that into the database.
Thank you so much. So it's time to wrap up. I just want to say thank you to all the panelists. A really special thank you for making time, for sharing all your experience and know-how. Also, Joandri, thank you for your reporting. Thank you for your work. Keep going, keep doing. I hope you got lots of new ideas, and anyone here as well that is a journalist, that you're excited to dive into the gender portal of the World Bank and really see if something pops at you, and think about environment and gender and stories. I also want to thank the interpreter today for keeping here longer than predicted, than expected. So anyways, yeah, stay close to the Earth Journalism Network and the Health Journalism Network, and thank you to Earth Journalism Network for co-hosting this webinar today with us. So bye everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.